Killed trying to get home, the Britons confirmed dead in the Kabul airport bomb blast. Nearly 200 people lost their lives in the attack, including 2 UK nationals and the child of another.
Our thoughts today are very much with their families and their loved ones. What their loss really underlines is the urgency of getting on and concluding Operation Pitying.
The US military insists it still has the resources and capability to strike back against Islamic State. We'll have the latest from Washington. We'll also be speaking to those who were on one of those final flights out of Kabul. Well, there's relief, but also grief for the country they've left behind.
I feel very sad, very painful for me, but I have to go.
Also in news at 10 tonight, favouring ballet over butchers, claims the UK immigration rules are to blame for food shortages. As COVID levels keep rising among young people, we're at Reading Festival, where there are worries it could become a super spreader event. And Ronaldo's return after a dramatic 24 hours with fears he was turning blue. Man United fans breathe a sigh of relief.
This is ITV News at 10 with Charlene White.
Good evening. In the early hours of this morning, the gates were locked and a line drawn in the sand at Kabul airport. On one side, the final 1,000 people due to be evacuated by British forces. On the other, a similar number who will be left behind. The Prime Minister said that left him with a deep sense of regret, but that efforts to help get people out will continue after Western troops leave Afghanistan for good. For some, though, that hope was stolen in the explosion that killed more than 180 people yesterday. Among them were 2 British nationals and the teenage child of another, killed trying to get to safety by what the Foreign Secretary called cowardly terrorists. And as the British and American military evacuation enters its final and most dangerous days, there was a warning that another attack is likely.
The blood-stained walls of Kabul airport mark the place where nearly 200 people were killed by a suicide bomber. Today, the Foreign Office confirmed that 2 British citizens and the child of another British national were amongst the dead. Instead of escaping to safety, those caught in the explosion were being carried away from hospital in coffins. Murdered, the British government said, by cowardly terrorists.
Our thoughts today are very much with their families and their loved ones, and I think what their loss really underlines is the urgency of getting on and concluding Operation Pitying in the way that we are.
Abdul Qadir Jalil was in Kabul for his wedding ceremony. Yesterday, 2 people he knew died in the blast. He's a British passport holder, but has been unable to get on a flight to the UK.
We are in a hell. Our life is gone anymore. So we won't be evicted from here, and we are completely disappointed on this decision.
Others injured in the explosion know that the window for evacuation to Britain has now effectively closed. Those already inside the airport can go, no more will be admitted.
Now the gates are closed, it's sealed off, and we're into the next stage, which is removing our military from Kabul.
Around 1,000 of those left behind have been advised to use the already congested land borders, like this crossing into Pakistan. No comfort to one of the British Army interpreters hiding in Kabul.
I know we are just being stuck, and we have no any other way to save our lives. And so my wife is crying about herself. She is caring, and she has already. We just given her hope. We are going to be evacuated to the UK, but unfortunately we left behind.
Despite the death of 13 US servicemen, the worst military losses in America for a decade, the president today pledged the evacuation would continue.
I met with my commanders this morning, first thing in the morning, got a detailed briefing about yesterday's attacks and the measures they're taking to protect our forces and complete the mission. And we will complete the mission.
In reality, these are likely to be amongst the last people flown out. The British have already started to withdraw their troops, and the US forces won't be far behind. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
Well, as you can see, our political correspondent Libby Vina has joined us in the studio. So, Libby, those airport gates have closed, but what exactly have the government said about those that have been left behind?
Well, when I spoke to the Prime Minister earlier, perhaps understandably, he was keener to talk about what had gone right about this rescue mission than what had gone wrong. But I pressed him to reflect on the fact that perhaps 1,000 people with the right paperwork are being left behind. And he did say he had a great sense of regret about that. Others have expressed their feelings more strongly. One senior Tory backbencher, a former Afghan veteran, said that it filled him with a sense of shame and anger. And I think in that sentiment, he's not alone. Those images of people clinging to the wheels of departing aircraft, falling to the tarmac, people queuing knee-deep in sewage. I think many people did not expect Britain's departure to be like this. And I think those images will haunt governments for years to come. They will raise questions about what our role will be in future in the world and whether we are a reliable ally at all, as we have said we are.
OK, Libby, thank you. Well, for those who have made it to relative safety inside the airports, the final part of their journey will have taken them on one of the many military aircraft that were constantly flying in and out of Kabul. Joining them on one of the last flights before yesterday's bombing were our senior international correspondent, John Irvine, camera operator, Sean Swan, and producer, Lufti Abu Aoun. They heard from many on that flight who were glad to be leaving, but in pain at the thought of what may come on the ground below, with some fearing they'll never be able to return.
Their pace was funereal. How appropriate. For them, their country just died, and they're saying goodbye to it. Their destination was the frightening unknown. These Afghan evacuees are the lucky ones, but they're still in mourning for the people and the place they leave behind. The numbers that the world's armies and air forces have managed to evacuate are incredible, given the time constraints and the fact they're surrounded by hostile forces. The Americans have taken the lead, of course, the Pied Pipers of this capitulation. In their wake, Afghanistan's vulnerable, the casualties of war weariness have benignly followed.
I feel very sad, very painful for me, but I have to go.
Do you think you'll ever come home to Afghanistan again?
I don't think so. Because we are just especially me and my group. We are football or soccer girls. Yes, from Herat and champion of Afghanistan. Yeah.
As we drove into the airport yesterday morning, we probably passed people who would be killed or injured in the suicide bombings later in the day. We didn't film their indignity, but we saw US soldiers from the famous 82nd Airborne Division standing just feet from the Taliban. The look on the Americans' faces was one of seething humiliation. The operation that they and other Western soldiers are protecting will be studied for its brilliance. Nations from the world over uniting to do what they can while they still can. These are Australians showing the sort of care and consideration the woman would never get from the new misogynistic masters of Kabul. The evacuation is a marvel, and then you remind yourself why it's happening. In short, it's depressingly impressive. The withdrawal from Afghanistan of just 2,500 American soldiers was the catalyst for this, the evacuation of tens of thousands of Afghans. What an absolute tragedy for them, and a complete humiliation for the Western powers, the Americans and the British in particular. Along with these Afghans, we were flown out by the Qataris. The service personnel who looked after us all were a credit to their country. The Americans say the drawbridge on the airlift goes up on Tuesday. the end to one of Joe Biden's forever wars. But what happened here will forever be an indelible and bloody stain on his presidency. John Irvine, News at 10, Doha.
Well, John has written a hugely powerful piece about his time in Kabul, watching the evacuation effort unfold and what he calls the graveyard of Western ideals that's been left behind. I'd highly recommend you read it, and you can find that and all of his reports on our website at itv.com/news. Well, shaken by the darkest day of his presidency, Joe Biden stared into the camera last night and told those responsible for the deadly attack at Kabul airport, "We will hunt you down." He's a president under pressure, including to make good on that threat. With America's military presence in the country soon to be non-existent, monitoring and striking back at the Islamic State's group in Afghanistan is about to get harder.
Flags lowered, loved ones mourned, coffins prepared again. As America comes to the end of its longest war, it's reminded that no solution in Afghanistan is simple or painless. Max Soviak, a Navy medic from Ohio, was the first American victim to be named today. One of 13 US service members killed in the airport assault. On Instagram, his sister said her heart is in pieces. It's 20 years almost to the day since a previous president first promised to hunt down terrorists in Afghanistan. But 9 days since this one downplayed the threat they posed, he said this:
"We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay."
40 miles from Kabul airport is Bagram, the airbase abandoned by the Americans weeks ago. Now they're fighting terrorists remotely, with facilities like this run by the Taliban.
We're not going to allow attacks on the homeland to emanate from Afghanistan again like they did 20 years ago. And we do have over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability available to us to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Over-the-horizon capability is a fuzzy military phrase brought to life by the death of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general killed last year not by a bullet, but by a US drone strike enabled by electronic espionage managed from far away. But the US isn't helped by hostile relations with some of Afghanistan's neighbours.
Iran to the west, the Central Asian states to the north, a very small border with China, and then Pakistan to the east. It doesn't appear very likely the United States or anyone in the coalition is going to be able to position robust capabilities near the borders of Afghanistan. And what I would frankly call the tyranny of that distance will have a significant impact on our ability to use those over-the-horizon capabilities.
So the US is forced to rely on the Taliban, whose leaders in Lashkar celebrated what they called the end of America's empire today. An old US enemy, a new security partner.
Well, Rohit joins us now from Washington. What are we hearing about the risk of further attacks in Kabul, though?
Well, Charlene, tonight the White House said that we are potentially entering the most dangerous period yet, implying that they believe that there might be a day even more deadly than yesterday ahead of us. They believe a second attack at Kabul airport is highly likely as the death toll grows and as the window closes on people being able to escape. The US military is preparing to strike back. They've briefed President Biden about potential locations. We don't know where or when or how, but we do know that previously President Trump used the so-called mother of all bombs, its most powerful bomb, against this group in eastern Afghanistan. As for ISIS Khorasan, this is a recruitment period. It's forced the US to choose between it and the Taliban. It has chosen the Taliban, and so the United States leaves Afghanistan having discovered a new enemy.
Rohit, thank you. OK, to news away from Afghanistan now, and the increasingly familiar sight in our supermarkets, empty shelves. The potent mix of the pandemic and Brexit is causing staff shortages throughout the supply chain. It's an effect which could last into the winter, with another warning that stocks of Christmas favourites like pigs in blankets and turkeys could run low.
This is just one sign of the increasing crisis in the labour market. Produce discarded in the fields because there simply aren't the workers to package and process them. Courgette plants need to be harvested repeatedly to keep their yield up. But because of a shortage of staff in the processing factory is so acute, some of the crop is being left to rot.
We've thrown probably 500 to 600 tonnes of courgettes on the ground. But I think the longer term issue is that farmers, without some certainty as to whether they're going to get labour, are not going to do deals for land, for seeds and inputs up to a year ahead. They're just going to choose not to grow those because they don't think they'll be able to harvest them.
Jobs like this are relatively well paid, but farms are struggling to find British workers to apply. Eastern Europeans have done the bulk of the work before, but post-Brexit changes to immigration rules mean fewer of them are now allowed in. The effects are now being seen on supermarket shelves, shortages caused by a lack of workers in a wide variety of jobs, from food factories to lorry drivers. At this haulage firm in Suffolk, they've been unable to fill almost a fifth of their driver jobs, even though wages have been put up 20%.
Brexit collided with COVID, and probably nobody could see that coming, but what has happened is we've lost somewhere in the region of 30,000 EU drivers have gone home during COVID, but now the rules mean they can't come back.
There's such a shortage of butchers and meat processors that there are now ominous warnings about supplies in the next few months leading up to Christmas.
Production of pigs in blankets, a classic one, and also setting aside gammons for Christmas. And if you go into the poultry sector, actually getting enough turkeys.
Despite sparse shelves, the government says its new points-based immigration system should encourage firms to invest in British workers. But food producers say too often their vacancies can't be filled locally. They want visa rules to be changed to keep our supermarket supply chain running smoothly. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says she's not currently considering introducing a circuit breaker lockdown, but won't rule anything out after another record number of COVID cases. 6,835 new cases were reported today, more than 1,800 above the previous record set earlier this week. Hospital admissions are also up. Ms Sturgeon urged people to do what they can to slow the spread of the virus.
We can't and shouldn't rule anything out in the face of a pandemic. None of us want to go backwards to even limited restrictions. Of course, we can't ignore the current surge in cases either. My job in times like these is not to be popular, it's to take any decisions, no matter how difficult, that are necessary to keep us safe, and I will certainly not hesitate to do that.
The origins of the coronavirus continue to divide US intelligence agencies after a review ordered by President Biden. One said it believed with moderate confidence that the first human infection was linked to a lab. Some have previously suggested the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the source of the leak. 4 other US agencies said with low confidence that the virus was initially transmitted from an animal to a human. After a COVID-enforced hiatus last year, tens of thousands of music fans are in Reading and Leeds tonight, dancing to the sounds of Stormzy and Liam Gallagher. And alongside the beers and burgers, festival goers have been offered a vaccine. With cases on the rise and many younger people yet to get jabbed, there are concerns this weekend's events could cause a spike in cases just as schools go back. 2 smaller festivals recently have been linked to thousands of infections.
Music, the masses, and no masks. It seems like the recipe for COVID to mingle and work its way through the crowd. And in all likelihood, it will. Everyone entering this site needs a negative test, and Reading Festival is doing what it can. But few here believe that it won't lead to a spike in cases.
If you're going to get COVID, you're going to get it. The only way to not get it is really isolate. Stay at home, pretty much.
It's just a bit scary, isn't it? Like, there's thousands of people here. It hasn't just gone away, has it?
I feel like if you come here, you have to accept you're going to get COVID.
I feel all right about it. I think if I were living at home with my family, I don't think I'd come.
History this summer shows COVID spreads at mass gatherings. Almost 5,000 cases were linked to the Boardmasters Festival in Cornwall. Reading has its own vaccination centre, hopeful of reaching an age demographic that has been slower than most at protecting themselves. Irrespective of the precautions that they've taken here, the evidence suggests that this kind of mass gathering will be a COVID spreading event. The only question is how much damage it'll do in the long run. The scientists believe it'll take a while to understand the true impact of this weekend.
Younger people can still spread very effectively to people around them. So what we could end up is a really big peak of infections.
But are festivals in the firing line due to scale, as the organiser here believes?
This will not be the only place in England that people get COVID this weekend. They will be getting COVID in the pub, in the park, in the restaurants, on the bus, on the train. It's here. It's here forever. It's not here because of festivals. It's just here.
A rise in cases is seemingly inevitable. Hopefully that won't translate to hospitalisations, although there are no guarantees. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Reading.
Come Monday, there's likely to be a sea of rubbish left behind at the festivals, which is fairly usual, but it's a mess that some of Britain's beauty spots are less used to. But such tourist areas have grown in popularity this year, with the Brits staying here to avoid the quarantine gauntlet. And one unwelcome result has been the ugly stains left on the landscape.
The glorious Lake District. It leaves a big impression on any visitor, but look at the impact some tourists have left on it.
They're just leaving barbecues and all sorts of things all over the place, setting fire to tree bases and leaving the rubbish there, dirty nappies stuffed in walls. We feel as if we're prisoners in our own village because they just don't care about us.
Most of the visitors are taking advantage of the outdoors.
Clearing up after a minority of visitors is taking resources away from important work.
It has an impact on the amount of work we're able to do to support conservation and wildlife.
That's a terrible shame. I wonder if people realise that when they're littering and leaving camping gear behind.
I think it's probably furthest from the mind, to be honest.
Problems have been reported across the UK with fears of over-tourism, antisocial behaviour, noise complaints and scenic routes under siege. Some now believe visitors to national parks should face an environmental charge to cover clear-up and conservation costs. But do tourists think such a charge would be reasonable? Phil and Jackie Gale are here from the Midlands.
If it's not too extortionate, I would actually pay for that. Because if you think about other places that you would go to in the world, it may be on a plane. You know, there's taxes and other hidden costs that you would have to pay.
It's reasonable to say those people who are causing that, we're going to ask you to pay.
Changes may be needed to keep this unspoilt countryside unspoilt. Chris Joy, News at 10 in the Lake District.
A man's appeared in court accused of injecting syringes filled with blood into food at 3 supermarkets. Solicitor Lioi El Gharib is charged with contaminating or interfering with goods with intent at a Tesco Express, Little Waitrose and Sainsbury's Local in West London on Wednesday evening. Shoppers were advised to throw away anything they bought from the shops late on Wednesday. Last night on News at 10, we reported on calls for the man convicted of assassinating US presidential candidate Bobby Kennedy to be freed. While in the last few minutes, Sirhan has been granted parole after serving 53 years in prison for the first-degree murder of JFK's brother. His lawyers argued that the 77-year-old Palestinian now poses no danger to society. He had lost 15 previous requests to consider his release. Everywhere you look today in Tokyo, there was success for Britain's Paralympians. At the athletics, at the pool and at the velodrome, the medals kept on coming. 11 in all, 3 of them gold. Among them was Kadina Cox, who 5 years ago became the first Briton since 1984 to win gold in 2 different sports at the same Paralympics. She's targeting another golden double and got off to the perfect start on her bike this morning, blowing away the competition and the old world record.
Cox begins her race for gold.
She was the last to ride in the cycling final, but Kadina Cox showed no signs of pressure.
And she's done it in fantastic style.
Not only did she defend her C4 and 5-time trial title, she did it in a world record-breaking 34-second run.
That was absolutely something.
Watching from Leeds, her sisters always knew she could do it.
She's overcome so many things, you know, from a stroke to, you know, finding out she's got MS. And the first thing she said was, can I run again? And, you know, she's gone out there and she's accomplished all this, and it just proves that, you know, when we think things are impossible, actually they're not if you put your mind to it.
Yeah,
and on day 3 in Tokyo, the Paralympics GB team have continued to shine, winning 11 medals. In swimming, Hannah Russell retained her S12 backstroke title, just holding off Russian Dara Pikolova by 1/3 of a second.
And it's gold to Great Britain, it's gold to Hannah Russell.
And keeping everyone on the edge of their seats too, Rhys Dunn won gold in the S14 freestyle by 0.34 seconds.
He's going to claim gold for Great Britain.
Bethany Firth, though, just missed out on the top spot in the S14 freestyle.
It's silver for Bethany Firth.
And in the dressage, Natasha Baker added a silver medal to Britain's tally, unable, though, to add a 6th gold to her own. In her Paralympic debut, Olivia Broom won bronze with her own personal best lift, a moment she had always dreamed of but never thought possible until now.
Being in the Paralympics was always something that I'd wanted to do. So now to call myself a Paralympian and a medalist, it's the best thing.
And in fencing, the men's épée team won bronze, something these young Paralympians have worked 5 years for. Every moment worth it for an impressive day 3 of the Games for Paralympics GB. Sangeeta Lal, News at 10.
And finally, from gold medals to a footballer with a golden touch. All morning, the talk was that Cristiano Ronaldo was about to make a sensational return to Manchester. Controversially, though, to the blue half. Not so fast, said City's rivals at Old Trafford. By early afternoon, Manchester United's interest was out in the open, and just before 5 o'clock, it was official. 12 years after the man who scored 118 goals for them bid them before he bid them farewell, the club announced he's coming home.
When he first arrived at Old Trafford in 2003, Cristiano Ronaldo was an awkward 18-year-old with a lot of potential. But at Manchester United, he became a global superstar, playing his part in filling the club's trophy cabinet with 118 goals over 6 seasons, scoring only the way Ronaldo can. Now, 12 years after he left the club, he's on his way back, boarding a private jet in Turin this afternoon, after making it clear he no longer wanted to stay at Juventus. As he arrived in Portugal amid much press speculation, United confirmed they'd swooped to snap him up. The news welcomed by fans in Manchester.
He's back with us, like he's back from where he started, and he's ending at the place where he has to end. That's what it feels like. It's really tremendous to be back.
Oh, it means a lot. Like, when he was there before, he was really good. And then he left and now he's back. Can't believe it.
Ronaldo had been rumoured to be heading for rivals City, but news of his return to his old club has been greeted with tweets of delight from his new teammates and the seal of approval from Rio Ferdinand, who was toasting his signing this evening.
This is the hottest ticket in town at Old Trafford now. There's no hotter ticket around. I don't care where you look in Europe, in the world. The hottest ticket is Old Trafford. That's what Ronaldo brings. The attention on the club, the attention on the other players. I mean, you can't put into words what this is going to do for the dressing room, for the fan base.
With just the small print to be finalised, Manchester United have pulled off the shock transfer of the summer and the homecoming of one of their greatest heroes. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
He's made a lot of people very happy. Right, that's it from us tonight. For me and the whole of the News at 10 team, enjoy your bank holiday and see you soon. Bye.